was to buy a yellow tie. I not say whether I bought it to console myself or I bought it out of joy, but we had to react to that announcement that now we have new government that supports bottom-up. But we are here today to ask ourselves, what is this bottom-up? When Mary received the news that she's going to give birth to the Messiah, she asked the question, how shall this thing be? And we are here to ask ourselves, how shall this bottom-up work? Is the debate that we like to have here, and then how does it relate to taxation? I'd like to start by highlighting a few issues. I'm not the main speaker of the day, but I'd like to highlight a few issues about this bottom-up model. They have indicated, that is the government, that within 5 years, we'll be spending 2.6 trillion on these bottom-up projects. And these 2.67 trillion, 250 million, not million, billion, shall be spent on agriculture to support bottom-up. To support SMEs, we spend 397. I draw your attention to the screens. 397 million. When you hear of ASLA funds and such initiatives, they are anchored on this, and within 5 years, we'll have spent around this amount to support the bottom-up initiatives. Housing, 62.9 billion. There'll be health, around 359 billion to be spent on this, in addition to what is ordinarily spent. On roads, a big chunk, 823.3 billion. Education will take a very huge chunk. Remember, we are also dealing with the issue of transition from 844 to CBC. There are other enablers, like the digital economies, where the youth like you lie, sports and some other sectors. Combined, they'll take up 2.42 billion. 2.7 billion we are going to consume on this. As we plan, bottom up, what I'm trying to say is it has implication on our spending. Right now, actually by December 2022, public debt stood at 9.15 trillion. The debt in this country is ever increasing. And when it was around 5 trillion, we were said it is too much to borrow more. Those times we were floating the Eurobond. But then we went further. And then there's what they call the debt ceiling, which they keep on revising, which I understand now. They are revising even to say that it is okay for us to borrow up to 11 trillion. Then look at our debt to GDP ratio, 60%. That's where we are. By the way, as an academician, I can sort my source. This is coming from the Public Budget Office, this data, and the debt strategy paper that is being presented as these details. That's where I pick it from. So these details are coming from the Treasury. Debt service ratio, this is the most interesting thing, 49.2%. What is this debt service ratio? It means this: when we collect taxes, 100 shillings, 49 no taxes, we pay debt. Then look at the budget that we are going to have in the next fiscal year. We are talking about 3.64 trillion. But when you look at tax, the last reported for the year 2021-2022, the best that we have ever reached. The first time we hit the 2 trillion mark, we are talking about 2.031%. The best that we ever reached. If it is going to increase, try to imagine that it's going to increase maybe by 20%, it will not get to the budget that we are talking about of 3.64 trillion. Most worrying thing, inflation. January 2023 stands at 9%. Very high. It was projected to be at 7.5%, but now it overshot that. What is feeding this? Much of it is this situation that we have in the country. This is where we are as a country. We have huge requirement on spending, huge requirement to raise revenue, and then there is this project that we have to fund bottom up. What happens next? Rather, what are the options that we have? And I'm concluding with this slide. Because we need to raise more revenue, should we think of raising, or rather because we have a huge budget to finance, is it right now to think of raising taxes? And I think it is not right. When inflation is at 9%, slight increase in tax, in my own opinion, will trigger more inflationary pressure. It will shoot over 10% and thereabouts, and it will not be good for the country. At the same time, we need the revenue. I'm not heard of any talk about tax breaks. We talk about tax holidays, we talk about tax incentives. Again, in my opinion, it's not good now to offer these tax breaks because they reduce the revenue that would have been collected. People would argue that when you give a tax break or a tax incentive, then it happens to be a windfall to those who are receiving that tax break. They would have paid the taxes, but now you give them an allowance just to claim. So at a point where as a nation we need to raise more revenue, then increasing taxes is not a good idea. Reducing taxes by way of giving some tax incentives again might not be a good idea, and I've checked the proposals in the budget. They have invited public for participation. I've not heard of any idea about giving tax breaks, except for the carbon credits because of climate change. So, what do we need to do as a country to finance this huge budget and also to make sure this bottom-up works? In the short term, what might be necessary is to increase the compliance rate. Now we are told, according to statistics, that our tax to GDP ratio is 15.3%. I got this from OECD. 15.3%. When they compare with other countries, especially outside this continent, we should be doing 25%. And that's why even the president feels that the compliance rate is not right. I've just said KRA made their target last year by collecting over 2 trillion. But now the president believes that they should raise more than that, and he gave a target of 3 trillion this year. And then in the next 5 years from now, we should be doing 5 trillion and increasing. So some proposals to increase compliance, for instance, is to increase the VAT compliance rate, which currently stands at 60%. President talks about increasing this to 90%. And to make it happen, I understand there's new technology that will be rolled out in the name of eTeams. We have just launched, last year's November, we launched TEAMS, Tax Invoice Management System. But that is not good enough to increase the VAT compliance rate. So there'll be a cloud-based solution, which is in the name of eTeams, which is expected that to raise VAT compliance rate. So this is a welcome move that we increase the tax compliance, given that it is not wise to increase the taxes. For those who are already paying taxes, it's not wise to increase them further. So what can we expect next? In the medium term, it's good to formalize the informal sector. My proposal, or my opinion, to formalize the informal sector. Why we say this? 16% of the jobs of employment in this country is in the formal sector. The remaining 84% is informal. And if you look at compliance in the informal sector, is really difficult. First of all, to determine the income that is within this informal sector is a challenge. To actually say this person has made this much, therefore this should be the tax. So it's a mere 16% of people who are under employment, who are under the formal employment, otherwise paying what we call PSU1. If you look at that PSU1, it gives 25% of the tax revenue of the government. And that's why it is a key sector. If we increase the people who would fall under PSU1, then this would increase the tax rate. Rather the tax collection, the tax yield will increase. Then you hear these country taxes are paid by around 2,000 taxpayers. Those are blue chip companies like Safaricom, KCB, and then government organizations like TSC and a few others. this economy is supported really by few organizations. What is collected from this informal sector is not much. So of concern is how in this bottom-up that we are thinking of, as we think of giving them loans, how can we formalize them with the objective of increasing taxation? And lastly, in the long run, then we hope that this bottom-up is going to pay off, that will have more people who have been empowered, and these more people who have been empowered can pay. If you look at our society, it is pyramid, very wide at the base. That wide base is where the poor are, so many of them. When you have so many poor people in an economy, then the taxable capacity of that nation is obviously low. This way, one person earning 100,000 shillings will pay more taxes than 20 people earning 10,000 shillings each. If you do the math, you'll get that. As far as taxation is concerned, you rather have this one guy who is making 100,000 than 20 guys collectively making 200,000. So what should we do? We should try to boost these people who are at the bottom of the spectrum, these guys who are earning amounts which are not taxable, or even in their spending, there's no more tax to attract, because even the githeri that they consume, these low-income earners, it will not fall under VAT and other taxes. So because of that, you realize that, true, we may have huge GDP, but it's generated by sectors that do not fall under taxation. Therefore, the objective here is to work towards an oval society. An oval society has very few people in the base, very few poor people, very few rich people, but bulging at the middle, where you have huge majority being in the middle class. But I've just read today that most of the people who call themselves middle class are at the verge of falling backwards to that category that we call poor, that category that we cannot expect to pay taxes. So with that, I just wanted to bring this idea of what would be the implication of tax, bottom-up on taxation, and then how do we fund this agenda as a country. And with that, I like to take this opportunity to invite my boss, the DVC, Academic Affairs, Academic and Student Affairs, Professor Joshua Bagaka, also to tell us his interpretation of bottom-up. Thank you very much.
So, you know, Faustin likes talking about tax. In fact, if you allow him to talk about tax, he will talk about it the whole day. But that's why KCA University is a center of excellence for tax education. Thanks, Faustin, for being such an inspiration and being very passionate about this topic. The guests who have come for this function, my colleagues, students, good afternoon. Okay, for me, I'm actually very grateful that we are having this conversation today. Okay, I'm very happy that we have this conversation here at KCA University, because KCA University wants to trigger some of the very serious conversations about some of the controversial issues. It's not long ago since we had a series of them, including discussions about CBC and others. So that's really good. And we are happy that today we have two things going on. One, to think about taxation. I think KCA University is walking the talk as the center of excellence for tax education. The second is we are linking it to something which is very, very important for us as a country, because we have triggered this conversation from the political class about bottom-up. And the bottom-up actually has been completely misinterpreted sometimes. I remember somebody using a bottle, trying to drink and saying it's, yeah, so it's been translated in so many ways, and a lot of us really don't understand what it is. Some of us think that bottom-up means that the resources and the wealth at the top should come down to the bottom. And some of us think that probably it is creating opportunities for the bottom to generate the wealth. So we really don't know which is which. And I was actually saying that me as a non-economist, I actually don't understand. And I think today I will probably get some understanding of what it is. The only thing I know is that it's the opposite of trickle-down. And probably it's not true, but probably it is the opposite. But you know, I was in Cleveland, Ohio the other day, and a friend of mine took me for lunch, but we went to have lunch in a bar. And as we were having lunch, we also wanted to have a drink. And he ordered a beer. But he actually described the exact beer he wanted, the kind of flavors he wanted in the beer and all that. So the person went back to actually make the beer and bring it to him. So the beer was just made in that particular bar with the flavors, just like the way we get coffee, we want these particular ingredients in the beer and I mean in the coffee, but he wanted the beer with the clear descriptions of what he wanted. And it was actually made. And I started asking myself, maybe this is the meaning of bottom up. Because instead of depending get beer from Kenya breweries, which has all the preservatives, we are going to get something which is fresh and with some things which are the flavors we want. Probably that's what. But then when I was thinking about that in the Kenyan context, and I was just about to think about starting my own beer place to make some muratina and have my own customers, you know, I started asking myself about this context that, you know, if that is what bottom-up means, then we need to trust the bottom. Because if you actually have us make our own muratina, we can probably add something else, and so on and so forth. You know kumi. Was that something they call kumi? So the question now I had is, probably this also has something about trusting the bottom. And I think as we have this conversation, I think we'll learn some of these things. I really would want to welcome the panelists as they discuss this. I'm particularly happy that we have students in the audience, because these are the people who will really begin this conversation so that they can have a very live discussion about some of these issues, so that this program can actually be effective in having a positive impact in our society. So I don't want to take much time because we really need time for this conversation. I want to take this opportunity. Panelists, and I noticed that they are not only experts in the area, but they are also people who are involved in the community, very active participants in the community. So I want to introduce Tony Kitonga Murega. Can you please stand if you don't mind? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Tony is a consultant, but he's also a lecturer. So, which actually means that he has this dual role of being a lecturer, which means he impacts knowledge to the young people, but as a consultant, he's also very much in contact with the community, and particularly his role in the devolution into the counties and such places. But he's a diligent economist and an accountant for over 10 years in training and capacity building in areas of economics and finance, and over 3 years in independent consultants on governance and the budget transparency in devolved governments, regional markets, MSMEs, and livelihood projects. Please join me to welcome Tony Kitonga Murega. Okay. So the next one is Professor Vincent Okoth Ongore. Professor Okoth, first of all, is a scholar. He's a scholar in strategic management at the University of Nairobi. And he actually got this doctorate from the University of Nairobi. He's worked widely, but right now he's at the Technical University of Kenya, TUK. And he's also quite active in corporate governance frontiers, being an executive director and a CEO for the corporate governance frontiers. And one of the things I noticed from his CV, he works very closely with several places, including the Kenya Revenue Authority, the Kenya Teacher Service Commission, and also with other universities, including the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, even the University of Colorado in the US, and the Kenya School of Monetary Studies. Please join me to welcome Professor Okoth. Karibu sana. Kwame Owino. Yes, Kwame Owino has been instrumental in leading the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA Kenya, leading Kenya's strategic intervention into the go-to think tank for sub-Saharan Africa and the region. He undertakes and oversees research in Institute of Economic key policy areas on public expenditure, economic regression, devolution, and the use of future methodologies to inform public affairs in Kenya. Currently, Kwame Owino is the CEO for the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya. Please join me to welcome Kwame Owino. And with that, take the program from here, and karibu sana.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. My Prof. I've been lucky to have an opportunity even to be in your classes. It's very inspirational. So without much further ado, I think, Margaret, the floor is now yours. Our very own, Margaret Ndiga, can now proceed with the discussion for the...
Thank you very much. Yeah, so before we jump in to our debate for this afternoon, I would want to recognize the presence of Standard Media Group. They are with us. Yes, so I think first is to put forward the role of the university, and KCA is taking leadership in this space to be part of the team that is leading in shaping opinion about matters that are in public domain. My instrument, okay? Yeah, so I'm saying that KCA is taking leadership in playing in this space where we want to shape public opinion on matters that are topical, matters that are of current interest in our country. And one such issue is the issue before us this afternoon, to talk about the issue of bottom-up economic model, so to speak. A lot of us have interacted with this in political spheres, and for a good majority of the people, it has just been bottom up, as a way of identifying political parties. But now, as a university, we want to take all these things to the next level so that we are able to separate all the concepts that are involved. And before us is an assembly of eminent personalities, people of considerable achievement in their spheres of professional lives. And they are going to break down all these concepts for us to be able to understand them objectively as members of the university and the entire public of Kenya. And so I would want to start by asking Kwame, you can start off for us. Please unpack for us this whole thing called bottom-up economy in a layman's terms, because we have people here and the rest of the world that is watching, people who do not have the benefit of depth of knowledge in economics, but in a way that is going to help us be able to understand this concept better. And if possible, you can give us examples of countries where the model have been implemented, whether they failed or they succeeded. Over to you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and KCA University for inviting me to be here today. Now, I think we need to distinguish certain things. There's no such thing as a bottom-up economic model based on the conventional understanding of what an economic model is. An economic model is an equation that allows you to be able to manipulate and find out outcomes based on one thing or the other. So that's how an economist understands a model. However, we have a political party in Kenya known as Kenya Kwanza, which uses the word bottom-up as a distinguishing feature or a differentiator between themselves and other political parties who are contending with them. So in the use of bottom-up, many of them have used it different ways. But please allow me to only track the most coherent person. The others are really not worth discussing in a platform such as this. The most coherent person who's used the word bottom-up. This is what he says. His view is the government of Kenya needs to be sensitive to expenditure priorities and policy priorities that touch on what Bagaka said, right? People who are most disadvantaged in Kenya, and therefore priorities for spending, priorities for policy, in a way that enables government programs and government activity to benefit the highest number of people. And who are these? They tend to be working people who come from homes in which people work, their incomes are insufficient, and they don't have a political voice. That's it. That's the argument as I got it. And he wrote, I think, 11 tweets, thread of 11 tweets sometime in October 2021, even before the elections, trying to give coherence to this. Now, other people have called it all manner of different things. So that's it. It's a question about where government priorities will be focused based on who you wish to benefit the most, but also because in his view, farmers, small-time traders, and people who work in the informal sector have less political power and their voice is not heard in government policy projection. That's what it is. So let's say, for my conversation today, when I mean bottom-up, I'll be talking about what David Ndii has said, because he's the economic advisor. I think he had a big role to play in the manifesto that was drawn. Economic model. It's a projection and communication about where government will focus its most, the clearest policy incentives. So for instance, the government of Kenya is not interested in creating, or rather, this bottom-up would tell me that the government would not be interested in creating, is not necessarily against it, but it's not interested in attributing resources or directing resources towards large-scale farmers. They're important, agriculture is important, but they would concentrate on the output that come from the small number of millions of farming families in this country. And he's demonstrated that if you use government resources efficiently, you actually get as a bigger growth burst than you do when you concentrate on activities in which sometimes the wealthiest, the most educated, and actually people with more resources concentrate on. So that's it. It's government's redistributive interest. Some of it would be redistributive, but most of it would be the policy focus. I hope that's clear.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kwame. I think I would want to open it up for the other panelists. If there is something that you want to add on to what has been submitted by Kwame, is issue of bottom-up, so that we understand it much better. So,
okay. Good afternoon. Between the bottom-up that is discussed in public and the bottom-up that is in the manifesto. So the bottom-up that is in the manifesto is basically what Kwame has summarized. The idea being to channel resources, at the bottom being that the economy is like a pyramid. You have very few people sitting at the top, and those few people are privileged, what they call privileged. They have the resources, they have good jobs, and we have the majority, a big number, which is an estimate of 85%, at the bottom, and they are involved in MSMEs. Now, MSMEs are basically dominant in sectors that have poor earnings, 9 people. Their average incomes are too low. I would call it survivists. These are people who just live hand to mouth. They just survive. But estimations are, if you give them sufficient resources, invest sufficiently in the sectors in which they are dominant, then you're likely to raise them. I mean, like 50% of those people actually earn less than 5,000 a month, which therefore means that they are the same people who are affected by hunger. I mean, the food shortages, poor incomes, and basically poverty. So the idea was to invest in those people, and he did actually demonstrate, and I would cite the KIPRA report, that the value chains, we have like 5 value chains, and 4 of them are in agriculture. Some of them being things like vegetables, and that's the reason why there was the talk about the mama mboga, which therefore means if you invest in these areas, you're likely to have bigger outcomes in terms of increment in incomes and livelihoods. So if you are able to increase like 200 shillings a month for these category, then you're likely to increase the GDP by almost 50%. Now that was the idea. And then you would lift these group up. So, since we are a country that is inadequately resourced, I mean, we have insufficient capital or inadequate capital, then the idea was you invest that inadequate capital in areas where they have the greatest impact in terms of job. Now, in their estimation, creating a decent job in a public sector, in a formal sector like manufacturing would require 1 million Kenya shillings to generate one job. And the contrast is if you invest that money in the informal sector, which they call the bottom, you actually need between 120,000 to 240 to create a job, which therefore means his argument was, or the argument of this paradigm is that if you invest more on the bottom, you're likely to create more jobs. And what I would call in the Jeremy Bentham's ones, the greatest happiness of the greatest number.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is such a good perspective that we want to put our 1 million where Professor Ongore, if you have still some ideas and thoughts you want to share, I welcome them, but in the process, I'm asking you to give us the nexus between taxation and bottom-up economy. I know you have had a lengthy service nearly at the apex of KRA, and matters of tax is really very dear to your heart. If you can draw for us a connection between this bottom-up and the whole issue of taxation, please.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have a bit of cold. I spent a good part of yesterday with the president in Korogocho. We were doing exactly what we want to talk about today. Talking about the Nairobi Waters Commission, which was being inaugurated yesterday. That is not the reason I'm here. I must say, with great honor to the DVC, Academic and Student Affairs, that I'm extremely happy to be here, because for me, KCA is home. I taught here 10 years ago, and some of my A students are here. I can see them, including Charles here, Charles Chengo, isn't it? And Audrey, and a number of them, including my colleagues, Owino, I think Wanjala, all of them. So I'm actually at home. I also wish to add pioneer directors for Center for Public Finance and Tax, with Rajesh, with Riaga, with Mwatu, and a number of other people. So looking at the alternative policy designs for our fiscal management. I did that until I left KRA. As I said, many of you would know that I worked at KRA for an extremely short period. I did only 30 years. It was while there that I worked as an adjunct faculty here at KCA, and I must confirm that KCA is a beautiful university. The programs are beautiful, and students are hardworking. The faculty is top-notch, and given an opportunity, I would be here earlier than anywhere else. But don't tell my boss this. Now, what are the two disturbing problems that we have had to grapple with as a society for many years? Poverty and inequality. So the whole question of bottom-up, whatever the conceptualization, is supposed to address poverty and inequality. How radically different is this approach from what has been there before? Just before we went for the elections, and shortly after the new government came in, whether you remember?
Yes, we do.
And because we're economists, I want also to dispel this. Bottoms-up issue is not about economics. It's about society. There are business people here. There are farmers. There are sociologists. There are economists. All manner of people are involved in it and must engage in the conversation about the bottoms-up economy. But back to the issue of subsidies. What do subsidies do? Subsidies attack the economy from the demand side, which means giving you ability to purchase. Okay? In the fullness of time, you realize that the money that you are using to purchase is actually taxes. Let me put it down more simply. A packet of unga is supposed to cost, say, 100 shillings, okay? But government gives you a subsidy, so you buy it at 80 shillings. So where does the 20 shilling come from?
Taxpayer.
It comes from your taxes. So essentially, the economy is spending money to make you consume. But it's not too concerned about what you're producing. Are we okay up to there? And so what it means is that in the long run, this becomes unsustainable because we have to get money from somewhere. We are digging a hole to plug another hole. And this becomes difficult in the long run. So the new government is actually right in saying that subsidies are not sustainable, because where will you get the money to keep filling a hole? Now, with respect to now what they are calling the bottoms up, what is it that they want to do radically differently? They want to do, not what they are doing, what they are promising to do. The business people will tell you this is the value proposition. What is it that they're offering? This is what they are offering. That they want to look at the poor. And the poor, the UN defines the poor currently as those who are earning $1.9 per day. And remember, this is a very tricky thing, because if we moved it from 1.9 to say $6.5 a day, then most of you, including perhaps you and I, would be poor people. So definition of poverty is also relative when you look at it in terms of the $1.9 a day. So what are they doing? Invest in value addition at the bottom. So that, for example, if you look at agriculture, you're talking about value chain in agriculture, adding value at all the levels in agriculture, from the garden to the table. So that at each stage that you add value, all right, someone who adds that value gets an income. And if that person is defined as a poor person, he or she adds value to a process. The proceeds that go to that value addition actually go to the person who added that value. So if you give the poor capacity to engage in value addition, and that value addition gives a proceed, that proceed goes to that poor person. In the process, that person has an income that helps to enhance their welfare. I realize we have students, that is why I'm trying to be as basic as possible so that we agree on the issues that we're talking about. So that this person is able to meet their physiological needs. That is what UN talks about. Food, health, safe drinking water, sanitation, education, right? So that when we talk about bottom-up economy, and I said whatever the conceptualization, you are addressing the needs of the poor with a view of enhancing their capacity to produce and to earn. And when they earn, you are lifting a whole group from poverty. And when that happens, you are bridging the inequality gap. right? When we get to finer detail, we shall talk about them. But now back to the exact question that you asked me, which is what I eat, I live, I sleep tax. Now, tax in this country is a very interesting thing, because people who you think are poor and should not be paying taxes could be richer than most of you who pay taxes. For 8 good years, I was responsible for taxpayer education at KRA, covering the entire country, doing policy work and also ensuring that the processes for taxpayer education were put in place. And why do we do this? We do this to enhance compliance. And what is compliance? Compliance is a whole, spectrum of, activities and processes which start from taxpayer registration. That is number one, important thing in compliance. 2, filing of tax returns. 3, declaration of income. And 4, payment. So that is the taxpayer compliance continuum. Is concerned with domestic revenue mobilization. For them to effectively address that question of tax compliance, they must understand the various business models that taxpayers are involved in for them to be able to collect taxes from them. Let me give you an example. And I've been to literally everywhere in this country. That is why I speak all your languages. And after this, you can try me. You are in Moyale. Say you are in Sololo, or you are in Bute, or you are in Turbi, or around that place. And you get your animals, put them in lorries, because they do that quite a bit, some of them from Ethiopia. Take those animals to Dagoretti, bring them to Nairobi. You get your cash and go back. How will KRA know? We are talking about cash economy and the difficulty in traceability of taxable income. Bottom-up economy will happen if it does, and it should, if 2 things happen. Fine-tune fiscal policy architecture. In other words, where are you getting the monies? And I will share with you later where it is, because I did that for 30 years. Fine-tune fiscal policy architecture. In other words, design a fiscal policy that says unique attributes of Kenyans and their tax-paying behavior. Point number 1. 2, be the areas that you want for purposes of improving the value chains that will put money in the pockets of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Very clear that if you want to engage in bottom-up, then the masses must be part of the value chain, and as they become part of that value chain, their socioeconomic well-being will be improving, and that in itself is bottom-up. From down there, they start scaling up to higher income levels. Yeah, so I would want to ask, maybe Kwame, if you can come forth on this. Is it possible really for the government of Kenya, this new government of Kenya, to implement the bottom-up economic model with the existing tax regime as it is? Or is it going to have to fundamentally review the tax structure and the requisite legislation?
All right. Again, I come to this as a student of economics. if you study economics, it tells you that to have an efficient tax system, and the guy who did this, James Mead, won a Nobel Prize in economics, you need two things. A moderate tax rate, and you spread it over as many people as is possible. Two principles must inform that moderate tax rates, and then you spread it over as many people as possible. And you reinforce that, therefore, with enforcement. Basically, all that. So what that tells you, if your tax rate is extremely complicated like what we have in Kenya, you are going to have problems regardless of whether it's bottom-up, and I don't think bottom-up is an economic model. It is a political interpretation of an economic problem, which is basically we have a problem of poverty. As Prof has mentioned, we have a problem of poverty and inequality, and we think, therefore, government should intervene. That's a political interpretation of an existing economic reality. So I don't think there's anything in the bottom-up economic model that says that taxes must rise. If you ask me, and I need to compare this, I've done this as well. There's a country called the United States of America. When it had an income per person of $2,500, which is what Kenyans have, right? Government spending as a let me repeat that. When the United States of America had an average income per person of $2,500, which would be slightly more than 260,000 shillings per year per person, government size in terms of government spending, government tax collection as a share of the gross domestic product was 6. So for every 100 shillings made in the economy, government was collecting 6. So the size of government, which is this revenue size, is a political decision, and it has economic consequences. So I was a bit reluctant when I heard people saying that we should not take, as a student of economics, it would be wrong for me. There's nothing in economics that tells you, and here economists should have authority, that tells you that more revenue is necessarily a good thing. It isn't. Revenue collection is a tax, and a tax has an effect on every household. So when you say that we are raising taxes, you are telling people, pay government and eat less if food is the thing they needed to buy, or save less because there's less disposable income. So what you're making are trade-offs, which means you're deciding how much more money are we going to take from people, because in the end, we have corporations and we have people, but a tax is paid by a person. So that's it. So I am reluctant to accept the idea that to bring bottom-up economics to work means we have to raise taxes. That's not true. I know raising taxes would be useful for accountants because then it gives us jobs to do in terms of tax advice, and that's perfectly okay. But we must understand what the consequences of a tax raise has, including the perverse incentives that come with people now trying to do what? To evade the taxes, which is illegal. So that's all I should say for now. Thanks.
Thank you. So my next question goes to Tony. You know, we are talking about bottom up, and one unintended consequence of this is that it's introducing a class dimension to things. You've heard of some people calling themselves dynasties and others calling themselves hustlers, you know. So my question is, do you think it is necessary that economic models and or the tax structure be expressly or impliedly predicated on socioeconomic class differences of people? Is it not dangerous as a country to want to make this be very prominent as we present our manifestos? And you will forgive me for that, you know, we are not doing politics here. This is an academic environment, and one of the many tenets of academia is that there's that freedom and independent thought, which allows us to interrogate concepts that are going to be for the well-being of society. Over to you, Tony.
Okay. First, I think socioeconomic classes do not exist because we say they exist. They exist because of inequality. So if we now say we have hustlers and dynasties, that's not what creates the socioeconomic class. It was there, and will still be there whether we say or we don't say. So what I think is the cause of the socioeconomic classes is is first and foremost the entire structure of the society and the economy in which that served by that to that society. I mean, the inequalities in the economy and in the society, and when I say societies, because there are feedback mechanisms between social institutions and economic institutions, like education feeds into the economy, and education is a social institution, and we have means of production as economic institutions. So somehow, if a certain class can't afford, or a certain household can't afford education, basically what happens is they are disadvantaged in the labor market, which means they enter into a class of poverty by the virtue that they missed equality in education. So what I think is a tax system should not be based on the socio-economic class. But a tax system is based on some of the principles of taxation we talk about is equity. I mean, so now we decide on how do we define equity? Is it ability to pay, or the incomes, or I mean, the benefits that you receive? And most important of these, I think, one that enhances equity is the ability to pay. I mean, if the ability to pay then means we have a tax rate that is just progressive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, related to that, maybe, Professor, you will jump in on this. The middle class drive most of the Western economies. Say, because in the US, the middle class constitute 52% of the population. And ordinarily in the US, they don't have a very broad lower class level. On the contrary, in Kenya, the masses are the poor. So what are we saying here when we talk about bottom up? Our economy over the years, in my thinking, has all along been driven by the masses. And the masses are the poor. So is there anything really substantially new in this whole bottom-up economic model? Given that Kenya, we have majority of the people belonging in that poor category.
You are asking very good questions, I must confirm. And let me dive into this by first picking from where my colleagues have stopped. I am aware from my few years at KRA, I told you I did only 30 years. I hope to do more where I am now. That until we understand the business models of our taxpayers, we will be miscategorizing them. And I want to demonstrate. A person based in Gikomba imports containers upon containers of, second-hand clothing items. Sits at Gikomba. The second-hand clothing items are delivered to them. They distribute them to wholesalers who distribute them to retailers, and those are the people you see with 3 pairs or 10 pairs of shoes at Gikomba. Our approach to taxpayer recruitment targets the person with 10 or 20 or 15 pairs of shoes at Gikomba, who can hardly make a decent living out of that business. But there's a person who has 30 million shillings by importing those items in bulk, but who sits there and appears very poor. So we have a situation where we are looking for money and even considering raising our tax rates, the upper thresholds, in order to get more money. Yet we are not addressing the issue of money that is lying down there, which should actually be collected using an appropriate fiscal policy design and, tax administration structures that address those issues. Let us first of all mobilize our domestic resources, domestic financial resources, because they are there. Our inability to collect tax is not certificate for us to move and increase the taxes. Let me share with you this. The last book I wrote just before I left, and I invited all the business schools in this country because it was His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta who launched it. It was called Transforming Revenue Administration in Kenya, Strategies and Outcomes, 2018. Now, the key lesson that I want us to pick from this book, it uses data as a basis of revenue of intelligent tax administration. That we are saying, if you go to Kenya Power, for example, and you enable the KRA people to query the systems at Kenya Power, and they look at Professor Baraka's profile, and you have 10 power meters. That means you are attached to at least 10 houses. If we work backwards, cross-match that information with what we have in the database at KRA, we should be able to tell you in a very certain, because this is incontrovertible. You apply for water meters, rather for power or water meters, on the basis of your PIN. It is on the same basis that your tax, ledgers are managed at KRA. And so you are the same person. Now, let me ask you, Professor Barakas, your tax ledgers do not indicate more than one house. So it means you have actually been evading taxes on the 10, unless you are able to demonstrate, which I doubt, that you have 10 wives and that each of the wives lives in each of the houses. That is data-based tax administration, and which makes tax administration intelligent because you are basing it on something you can prove. If we intensify and deepen data, use of data, and machine learning capabilities in our tax administration, and basically that is what that book talked about, we will then be able to have clean tax data in our system. Okay? So let's begin by addressing where the sources of revenue are before we talk about increasing tax, because it is extremely, utterly unnecessary to increase taxes before you mobilize what you have. Okay? Because as you and I know, that person at Kikomba, let's forget about the importer and deal with the wholesaler. At the end of the day, has 1.5 million shillings. But our political class is categorizing that person at Kikomba as a hustler who should be protected from KRA, while attacking your salary, and I have an idea what it is because I have access to it. I'm sure you don't earn 1.5 million a day, right?
Not even 10%.
Yeah, so let's address those issues first. KRA has data warehousing and business, rather, I mean, what is called data, it is a data warehousing and business intelligence facility, which has been with them, I think, for now about 5-6 years. That facility helps to, I mean, using machine learning capability, helps to point to the direction where tax is likely to come from, the sectors that are likely to do well, right? And does forecasting for them. And KRA, for your information, and I'm saying this from my other role as a research committee member of the African Tax Administration Forum, which is based in Pretoria. KRA, in terms of digitalization, is ranked #1 in this continent. This may surprise you. The one that comes a distant second is the South African Revenue Service. And if you ask any Kenyan, they will tell you that it is a better revenue authority or revenue service than ours. Why? We have a lot of technology which we are not deploying. And therefore, revenue authorities that have less technology but are deploying them efficiently are generating more tax revenues than we are doing. So we are talking about inefficiencies in the system, not lack of taxes, you know, to underwrite our bottoms-up economy, quotes unquote, you know, programs and projects.
So, Prof, I will too short on that, but I know I will come back to that point because you're talking about inefficiencies. We would want to know later on if they are deliberate or it just happens. Allow me to rely on your wealth of experience and knowledge, Bwana Kwame. We say that the poor have a high propensity to consume and cannot then be relied upon to save and invest. Because every little money they get, they want to eat it all. So, what stops us as a country from then subjecting the poor to massive taxes so that we free those who can do something meaningful, that is the rich. Those who cannot do much, let them bear the brunt of taxes. Who know how to create wealth, have the means and the capacity to create wealth, be freed up from the burden of tax. How will that augur for the country's wealth creation agenda?
All right. I think we need to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of taxation? The purpose of taxation is not to be punitive or to show people that they are hated because they have wealth or don't have, and that. The purpose of taxation at the most basic level, if you read the Constitution of Kenya and the principles, is just basically to pay for the services that government owes citizens. So taxation is not an end in itself. So that's one. Now, the literature shows that the reason that most poor people have low savings, it's not zero, to be honest, and they save in ways that are different from the ones we recognize. So they don't have bank accounts that are full, but they have this. They have a granary, they have trees that they've planted, they have cattle which they can then offload into the market. So it's not true that they save. They save in different ways, and they save a smaller share of their income for two reasons. One of them is, one, if you have low incomes, and Professor Ngore told us here in the morning, a couple of minutes ago, about measurement of poverty. The reason the United Nations and the World Bank use the $1.9 per person per day as the cutoff for poverty is because of the number of calories you can buy for that amount of money to be alive, to be kept alive. So if you look at it in that way, the reason poor people save less is because to even meet the average, very expensive. So we have some rich farmers whom we protect and give free fertilizers, and we have people who buy maize and all those other things off the market and actually buy them at costly prices. So I think the idea about taxation is to say, what does government want to do with taxation? And that is mostly to fund public services, public service delivery, of which The bottom-up logic suggests that government services and government priorities and interventions will concentrate on those who are at the bottom to actually raise and to elevate their quality of life. If that is it, then it's acceptable. But let's remember a lesson in economics again. If you tax something, you get less of it. Yes. Taxation has the effect of squeezing things away. And economists draw fantastic graphs about elasticity and all that it means. Even if you tax labor, a point comes when somebody decides, given that for the next 100 shillings that I earn, I have to give government 30 shillings. Should I go out at night to earn that 100 shillings? And they decide to take leisure instead, which you cannot tax. So that's what happens. So we must understand, I hope this is what is understandable, and politicians who speak sometimes don't understand this. Taxation has a cost. So we must accept costs, and that's why the Article 201 and Article 209 of the Constitution says that taxation policy is a role of who? Parliament, not Treasury. Because parliamentarians are chosen by us, and we therefore communicate to them what level of taxes we are willing to bear. So when we say that government has raised taxes on fuel, has raised taxes on flowers, has raised taxes on drugs, on cosmetics, because we are supposed to look ugly, the people who've accepted that is not the presidency and the deputy president, right? The people who've accepted that is actually Parliament itself. Has suggested that if you have a disease that dries up your hands, or if you have an itch and you're buying an ointment that is also covered with some perfume, you're going to pay an excise tax just to keep yourself able to hold your pens without your hands sweating. Those are the political choices that have been made. So that's the way to understand them. Now, where the taxes reside, and let's remember there are taxes of many kinds. There are consumption taxes and there are income taxes. So that's one of the reasons why I correct people who say that the poor don't pay taxes. Excuse me. They pay consumption taxes because they have to go back there to buy paraffin, for instance, to do what? To light their whatever and cook. So they pay them in a different way, which is an indirect tax. The direct tax is the one that comes from your pay slip and all that, which is extracted by your employer, who does it on behalf of the KRA and sends it before the 9th of every month. Because if he doesn't, he actually will trigger a penalty because he has violated the law. So we need to separate between income taxes and consumption taxes. And so it is understandable to have a different view about income taxes on the basis of payment. Consumption taxes, economists suggest, should actually be spread evenly. Why? Because if people don't consume their incomes, then they save, and savings is an investment. So on the basis of income, government can have a different policy and approach. On the basis of consumption, government can have a different approach as well. So all taxes are not necessarily the same.
Thank you very much. I think now I want to go to Tony. Tony, my interaction with you and from the introduction that has been done here, I realize that there is a constituency of business people that you support in terms of capacity building. And my question is, the masses involved in micro and small businesses in Kenya have been used or accustomed to tax evasion over the years. And I want to believe it's because the government has lacked the mechanism for casting the tax net upon them. See, the boda, and if you do know, some of these boda people make 1,000 shillings per day, if not more. Tuk-tuk people, if you are to invest in a tuk-tuk today, you will be receiving 1,000 shillings every day. And that is if you have employed a driver on it. If you are the one driving it, you could be taking home in excess of 2,500 shillings every day, right? But no one seems to bother because 2,500 every day translates to almost 70,000 every month. While an accountant, like some of our students here who will graduate, will get their first jobs and be paid a salary of 30,000 or 40,000, they will already be feeling the pinch of the taxman. But this boda guy does not have to be worried about that. Are we not creating imperfections in our market where some people work and pay taxes that should be used to generate services by the government which benefit all? As an expert, is there some advice that you can package that should help the government come up with a mechanism of bringing all these people within the tax net? Over to you.
Okay. I think the problem with our tax system, let me just start with the tax system, is we have a very narrow base. Narrow base because obviously when you add the local and the import VAT, you realize that VAT is significantly higher than the payroll taxes, by not so much. However, the payroll tax is actually paid by employees from in the formal sector who are less than 3 million. If you, for example, earn 300,000, upwards of 80,000 will go to pay as you earn. So yes, because of the narrow base, there are some who bear an proportional burden. First, I'm not so enthusiastic about correcting too much taxes. Because in the first place, why do we need too much taxes? I mean, it could be we don't even need that much taxes because the more we collect, the more we spend sometimes in wrong priorities. The problem we have on the bonda guy not paying taxes, the mama boga not paying taxes, is the duality of our economy. We have the formal sector and the informal sector. Now, it's difficult, extremely difficult to tax the informal economy. Because first you need to have a formal way of assessing the level of tax. And I don't think the KRA's institutional capacity or any kind of technology that would spread its ability to tax the informal sector unless that informal economy is formalized. Now, one is there was the TOT tax, and I suppose I stand to be corrected by Prof, that the turnover tax was actually to bring the informal sector into board. Now, starting at 3%, went to 1%, but currently the court has ruled it unconstitutional. And even if it were constitutional, I would want to be interested in how KRA would collect that tax. I mean, how would they know who is to pay what? So to that extent, I think the informality of the economy is such that the taxation of that sector is absolutely difficult, and unless we formalize it. But again, because that's a discussion that we can have some other time, I believe the structure, the informality in our economy is not just, it's out of necessity. Out of necessity because it is our low backwardness. I mean, if you have, there are so many factors on why somebody doesn't want to go formal. And actually one of those factors, you'll be surprised, is to avoid paying that tax. But then you realize that the backwardness, the reason why you have a vegetable vendor making just money and comfortable in that, it's because of the structure of our economy. It's more structural. The informal economy is more structural than about legalities and regulations. In Germany, 96% of the farms are SMEs, but they are formal because they venture into sectors that are actually formalized. I mean, they are in manufacturing, they are in services, but our informal sector here owns probably urban retail trend, the juakari, if it has to go into something production, but mostly agriculture. Now, how do you formalize agriculture, which is in its own nature largely informal? I think to address the formality issue, then we have to address the structural issues of the economy, and that's not something we can do in the short term.
Which is a question we need to ask to the revenue collector, and on their behalf.
Yes, things like TOT, why is it?
Your sincere submission, does KRA have capacity challenges, or is it deliberate that they're not coming up with structures that can help us collect? You talked about inefficiencies. Are these inefficiencies naturally embedded in our tax system, or they are man-made inefficiencies? And speak from a very liberal standpoint, because we are in an academic environment.
Now, and thank you again. If you look at the last Wednesday's issue of the Standard, I had a long article there. I don't know if anybody saw it. And the article was, tax matters are private and protected by law. Do not discuss them in public rallies. And it was a whole page. I addressed some of these issues that you're talking about, but I'm not talking on behalf of KRA. I left KRA 4 years ago. To be precise, on 1st of March, 2019. After a stint of just about 30 years. I didn't want to work for long. Now, I want us to understand that taxation is not an exact science. We start from that point. It is not an exact science, which means that it relies to a great extent on the goodwill that government creates to enable the people of Kenya to appreciate why they need to pay taxes. Let me take you a little back so that I share with you my experience, and I will do it very fast. In 2003, we had a new government. When the new government came in place, President Kibaki promised that he was going to underwrite most of our development and recurrent expenditures from locally mobilized revenues. And so they were looking to KRA to help them do the job. So they appointed an able hand in the name of M.G. Waweru. He recently wrote a book, and if you look at the back of that book, there is something I wrote there. Now, what did Waweru find? What did he do different that enabled President Kibaki to deliver? He found a clogged tax administration. What do I mean? Taxes that were not collectible. Example, you are supposed to submit your return not later than 30th of June this year. That is personal income tax, right? You submit it on 1st of July. It is late. You may not know, because in your, I don't want to say ignorance, but in your not knowing, you think just one day. Submit your return, leave it there. The following year, since you submitted on 1st of July and nobody bothered, you think it's just fine. So you do that for 5 years. And you're okay, maybe you're submitting nil returns. You didn't make any money, or you are in employment and your employer did a good job with pay as you earn, and you don't think there is any other amount you're supposed to pay. 10 years later, a letter comes to you from KRA asking for 1.6 million shillings. And you say, no, but I've been submitting my tax returns. When you submit a tax return late, there is a penalty late submission penalty. And then the penalty attracts interests on a monthly basis. Over the years, you have the 1.2 or whatever million that you didn't know about. And really, you are submitting a nil return. That means you don't have that money. IMF and World Bank look at our debt books and say, Kenya has a lot of money that it has refused to collect. So why are they looking for more money? So they deny you the money. So what did Waweru do? He gave tax amnesty in 2004. That means pay all your principal tax. Principal tax is actually what you are supposed to have paid in the first place. Then all the interest and penalties are waived automatically. We cleared the bulk of it and brought Kenyans on board. And then there was intensified education. President Kibaki himself said, tulupe ushuru, tujitegemee. And so Kenyans came because they realized we could do it ourselves. And at one point, it only happened once, we were able to finance 97%. 97% of all our development and recurrent expenditures from our locally generated revenues. Capacity is something that is developed over time because societies are also changing. Business models are also changing. You may have capacity to address tax issues for a particular business model or a certain reality in society. But when these things change, you need to modify your capacity. I want to submit that KRA has what it takes to collect taxes from Kenyans. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Kenyans, vast majority, because KRA has a categorization. Micro and small, medium, then large taxpayers. Micro and small carries the bulk of taxpayers that contributes least. And yet they have potential to give us more revenues. It means we have not told Kenyans, we have not convinced Kenyans why they need to pay their taxes voluntarily. And how do you do it? I know most of you have traveled. If you take this route from Nyeri to Narumoru to Nanyuki, Isiolo, Achas Post, Serolibi, Merile, Lesamis, Achas Post, Marsabit, Turbi, Sololo, Moyale. I used to do that road many times, many years ago. You actually needed 2 days. From here you spend a night in Isiolo, then Isiolo you spend a night in Marsabit, a distance of 260 kilometers from Isiolo to Marsabit. Then you go to Marsabit to Moyale, 240 kilometers, right? But when the roads were built, business came. More people came along the road, more taxes are collected. Give Kenyan services and they will see the reason to pay those taxes. That is the secret to capacity.
Thank you very much and very well put. So there is this thing that I've always thought about, and I think I would want Kwame to address himself on this. That emerging and developing countries have the option, like Kenya is an emerging economy, of pursuing aggressive tax competition. We have seen the benefits of tax competition just right across here in Mauritius. They have a corporation tax rate of 15%. and that has attracted a huge chunk of multinational corporations. While I was preparing for this, I had the time to check, and I realized if you go to the registry of companies in Mauritius, you will find in excess of 800 multinational companies. While in Kenya, I took trouble to check, we have a number that is less than 100. So, with 15% from 800 big corporations, we are able to collect in Mauritius so much tax revenue. With our 30% here in Kenya, from just a handful of multinational corporations, it's not much. I know what the organization for the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, says about issues of harmful tax practices. But why bother with that if we still want to grow our economic wealth? What do you say as an economist on that?
I started by saying that there's certain principles of taxation that gives efficient and ensures that you have the maximum revenues. A simplified tax system and a moderate rate. Simplified tax system and a moderate rate. I think it looks like that is what Mauritius has done. And one other problem with Kenya's taxation, before I come to the question of corporations, is the tax rate and the tax code, if you call it, changes every day. I mean, let me say, every year. It's not a bad thing. If you're an accountant, that's nice, because every end of year we have to ask our accountants and our auditors, how has our tax structure changes, right? So it generates fees for some people. But what it does on the other demand side for supply side for corporations that works is it just makes it so difficult to manage taxation policy in this country. Now, I like the way we've had this conversation because Professor Ngoro has stated stuff related to KRA. Let's remember one thing. Kenyans make the mistake of thinking that taxation policy in Kenya is set by the Kenya Revenue Authority. The Kenya Revenue Authority is the administrator. So for instance, the taxation policy is actually set by Parliament based on Article 209 to 212 of the Kenya Constitution. I advise students of finance, business to read that part, if not the whole of Chapter 12. So what that means is Parliament decided, for instance, that for every word that you speak on a platform such as this, you pay 100 shillings. The KRA has no choice but to come to me and say, Kwame, you sat here for 2 hours, you said 200 words. 200 per word would be 40,000 shillings. Can you give me my check today? So let's remember who's the collector and who's the policy decider. So sometimes we heap the distortions, the problems, and the general problems and our pains of taxation policy on KRA when they're actually trying to do their best based on the confusion that comes from Parliament. So we need to make that decision. So the decision about making a tax policy that is predictable and moderate and then letting it run on its own is self-evident. I think it would also make the advice that comes from tax consultants, the accounting practices much, much easier for everybody else, and obviously the growth. So that's one thing that we've got to bear in mind. However, it has also been studied, and it's been found that if you're a country that has such a complicated tax structure, you also do other things poorly in terms of regulating businesses. So we don't have a bad tax code or a confusing tax code such as the one we have because of its own. It also shows that we have unconnected thinking in the way we do business registrations, in the way we do all those other things, which makes the Kenyan business environment an extremely difficult one in which to operate. So for instance, Kenya has something called the single business license, right? Now, if you wanted to open a confection factory, for instance, to construct, to make ice cream, because this is a demographically growing population, we have a lot of kids, we have 16 million children growing up every day and going to school. So you decide, that would be a market. You know what you do? You will get 17 other licenses and then get another one called the single business permit. Do you see how that makes sense? How sensible that is? And somebody somewhere sits and says they're managing policy and trying to create an enabling environment for government, for businesses. It's just, sorry for my French, it's nonsense in the name of business management. It's so difficult to find licenses here. So what you call a single business permit is just another place to pay some more money. So just running around and running around and running around is it. But if you ask me, there is nothing that dictates that a tax system has to be as complicated as ours. So I'll give you, I'll run this. We have a project at the Institute of Economic Affairs as we are researchers, and among the things we are trying to do is to construct using big data and all those new techniques about the complexity of a tax system based on the complexity of the words in the document and the size of the document. Now Hong Kong, which we like to go to and then come back and say we are trying to be Hong Kong and Taiwan and all those other places, has a tax code, all tax laws that fits in 20 pages. 20 pages. If you take Kenya's income tax and all the amendments that have been made into it, I think it's 1,200 pages or something. So even if you are the best accountant from this college, it takes you a year to read it before you can advise somebody else. I wonder how you guys do it nevertheless. But it looks like your training is extremely rigorous. So that's it. It is not as if they're less interested in collecting taxes. This is a country that actually balances its budgets every year, which means it collects sufficient taxes to be able to do that. But when you see pages and pages and pages and pages and pages, it means we are trying to do too many things. Sometimes we try to solve business problems using the tax code. And that makes it so difficult for the collector or the administrator of taxation to actually come and simply say, look, this is what you owe and this is how it should be paid. So yes, if you ask me, Mauritius would be a good example. There's no reason, there's nothing in economics or any science that says that 30% of income tax should be, the marginal rate should be 30%, and also for corporation tax it should be 30%. Nothing about that. It just depends on what you want to do, and making businesses do better is actually in the interest of tax collection and national revenues. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we are coming to an end or close of this part, but I want to believe there would be questions coming from the floor. Yes.
Yeah, we can accept maybe 4 questions, 2 ladies, students. Anyone who wants to go first? Elvis.
Thank you. My name is Elvis Odiwor, a CPA 5 student. My question is, Kenya has been on a borrowing spree which the current regime had vowed to end, and given the expenditure outlook of this country, do you foresee us running in or out of debt, and how would that be? Thank you.
I don't know whether we pick all the questions one at a time.
I would want to, there are only 4, we can get all of them and then the panelists can respond.
Okay, who is the lucky number 2, James? Let's have one from our staff here.
Thank you. My name is Benjamin Kenodia, lecturer here. Mine is directed to Kwame, as an economist, and it's about the dead weight loss. Yeah? Because we know that, especially in direct taxes, to pesa, the VAT and the excise duty, the higher you tax, we expect a loss of 2 things. 1, producer welfare and consumer welfare. So who will be the beneficiary? Nobody, apart from creating a huge dead weight loss, meaning the higher you go, the worse it becomes. So I disagree on overtaxing Kenyans. A question and a contribution.
Thank you, Bwana Benjamin. And just a short announcement. I'm seeing people maybe are getting, even after this, we are able to finish it. Please, you stick around. We have something maybe for you after this. Ladies now, we are only taking 4. Any lady? Yes, I'm seeing one at the back. Thank you. Kindly stick around.
Okay, thank you. My name is Miriam Melvin. I have a question. In the recent part, KRA has been aggressive in revenue collection. However, they have been criticized for being hyper-aggressive. So, given the highest target imposed by the current regime, is there a better way of collecting more taxes?
Thank you. That is straightforward. Thank you for the question. Ladies. Let's finish with this.
Okay, I'm called Miriam, and my question is, it was on when? I think yesterday night, I was watching news, and Mr. Gashagwa talked about the government being a company. So, and for only those who voted for Kenya Kwanza will benefit from the government. So how can we, can we say that those who will benefit, or for example, let's say, like me, I'm a Luo, I never voted for Kenya Kwanza, that's the reality. So only those who voted for Kenya Kwanza will benefit from the government or so. And this is a bottom-up model. So meaning they should help other people. So my question is, Ebo explain that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think
public demand, maybe just two more.
Thank you. I'm Mr. Mwinde, former student of Professor Okello. My question is, you have already indicated that the majority of Kenyans belong to the base and they pay the least. Do you think that if we changed to a certain extent our economy from being a cash economy would in a way arrest those collection inefficiencies from KRI?
Thank you very much. I think that is clear.
Thank you very much, and wonderful contribution. I think mine, I don't know who it will be directed to, but my professor is there. Mine is to challenge Sophie that we have had this concept which states that the rich will continue being rich, the poor will continue being poor, and the poor will continue bearing the burden to sustain the economy. I do not know if this bottom-up economic model will be able to demystify this concept. Thanks.
Well, that's quite a lot of questions. Banayaro, I see your question. Just one.
Oh, thank you. My name is John Oyaro. I'm a finance lecturer. Mine is more of a comment. All along I've been hearing the bottom-up model, and I've been wondering how the model looks like. But I'm glad Kwame has clarified that we don't have a model of this nature. Because mathematicians like Mijuka and Prof. Zavagaka will tell you that a model has variables, a dependent and independent variable. Even we in finance believe also the same. Models are variables. I'm glad to... Now, is it not inappropriate, therefore, to be talking about an unexistent model in practice? Should we be talking about a bottom-up hypothesis or a bottom-up theory for that matter? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bona Margaret, back to you.
Yes, so I think too much debt, that was the first question. I would want to request that Kwame will be the one to address this.
Okay, you know, this is painful for me to say. The problem with Kenya's debt is not that it was borrowed. The problem with Kenya's debt are two things. One, where it was spent, because when we had it, and I think we have to be very, very honest. In the year 2016, I wrote an article. Okay, let me just say that in the year 2016, it was clear to me at the Institute of Economic Affairs that the standard gauge railway and the last mile power projects were white elephants. Now, white elephants is what, of course, students of finance will understand, a project with negative present value. Right? It was clear. But Kenyans were very happy. It was another bottom-up like argument that you people who live in Nairobi already have power, and therefore you are jealous that your relatives in places that you left, you abandoned because they are living huts, now have power. Now, so the problem was this. In that year, 2017, before the elections, the Kenya Power and Lighting Company, through the Last Mile project, connected 2 million people. An addition, 1.8 million people. 600,000 of them did not pay the first month electricity bill. Listen to that clearly. We connected power to people. It's an expensive resource and people require it. That's true. 35% of the people who were connected to last mile power did not pay their first month bill. As an economist, I read that as saying there's something called revealed preferences. What they were telling you is, I have 800 shillings to pay for power, I will use it for something else. There was a greater need than electricity. But electricity was good because you saw, right? Both the president and the deputy president were going into huts and coming out with photo opportunities. So that's how a society can waste the difficult resources that the KRA earns after the taxation policy has been done. So it's not just about what you spend money on, rather it's not what you owe, it's where you dedicate those resources. If you dedicate resources to projects with a negative equity return, you'll have debts that you cannot pay for. So that's the first problem. The second was the design of the loans was such that, as was demonstrated to us, I forget your professor's name, but was demonstrated to us by one of you, who showed that this year, in the year 2015, because these are numbers we measure, for every 100 shillings in government revenue, only 27 shillings was going to the payment of taxes. I'm sorry, only 18 shillings was going to the payment of debts. You can tell, for last year, it is 48. Do you see what it does to the cash flows is also there. So it's both the design of the loans and all that. But many countries have loans. Are they payable, or are they invested in the right things? So that's it. So I keep telling people that actually what government should have done, the almost 40-50 billion shillings that was spent in, let's assume that it all went into power, but I don't know. Some people's pockets are warm for it. That 50 billion shillings, what government should have done is simply conducted a census, a lottery, and given a check to every household to do with it, whatever. It was as if money was brought, parked on the balance sheet of the Kenya Power and Lighting Company, which is still in trouble today because of that, and then it was actually thrown away. So it was actually value-destroying expenditure. So it's important to make sure that all government money is spent on expenditure that creates value, and secondly, that the structure of the loan is such that the value provides you with enough cash flow to be able to pay for it over time. That's it.
Thank you very much. We are actually running out of time. I think a few questions that have been asked here were already answered during the presentation, really, like the issue of inefficiencies of KRA was already fully addressed. Then there is also the issue of the dead weight loss. It was just a comment. We register that, and you agree as an economist. There is the young lady who has asked the question of the government being a company, and I want to request with humility, Bwana Tony, to explain it to our young upcoming academician without the excesses, because we really do not want to draw lines of polarity on issues here, because here is purely an academic platform. We have all our political choices, but when we are through with all these political processes, we revert back to our professional selves, and we analyze issues based on merit purely. So Tony, explain, if you can, in a manner that is going to help our young tax here also grow in how we perceive some of these issues that take place in the political space.
All right. I must say that that comment by His Excellency, the Deputy President, and also me surprised. I mean, because one is the government of Kenya is a government in which every citizen is a shareholder. Now, which therefore means every citizen deserves what the Constitution talks about, especially in Article 10, issues of equality, equity, and even as far as the state appointment are concerned, and I think it's true that too on the public service, it's absolutely clear that it should reflect the face of the country. It should have diversity of ethnicities, and it should promote equal opportunities.
I think, Tom, I want to cut you short there. You have answered the question.
Yeah.
You have said it, so please just give your parting shot, and then over to Professor to give his parting shot, and then to Kwame as we call it a day. You have said it well, you couldn't say it any better, and we all understand. Those are political statements. We really don't take them to heart, because we are Kenyans, we have been here, we know better. Thank you. Parting.
Okay, first I must thank the KCA University fraternity for having us here for this very candid and open discussion on matters of the economy. Let me say that the bottom up, the way is conceptualized to me, is something that can fundamentally change the economy. Now, the only thing that I'm not sure is whether the way it's conceptualized is the way it will be implemented. Yeah, and to that extent, I think on matters of implementation, then that's now where we will draw the line on whether this is actually bottom up or something else, a variant of trickle down maybe.
Thank you, thank you. Over to you, Professor.
We would be doing a great deal of disservice to our country and the makers of our constitution if we did not say emphatically that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is actually a bottom-up economy constitution. If you look at Article 210, you look at Public Finance Management Act, I think Section 12, they both talk about participatory approach to budgeting, so that the people at the grassroots identify what they want, then finances are mobilized to address those needs. So when you give traction in terms of, appropriation to projects and programs that have been identified by the people themselves, that actually addresses the grassroots issues. I think what we should then be talking about is that maybe some opportunities were lost and we want to retrace our roots because the framework is already there. The talk about whether it is bottoms up or bottoms down is neither here nor there. The issue really is that we need to address the issues at the bottom by giving capacity and adding value to the chains there, so that at each stage there are proceeds that go to the producers of those value, and that way we are giving income to the people at the bottom. But let me do. There is something here, so that my friend there talked. I can't remember his name now, but he talked about whether we believe that the cash economy is the problem. It is a huge problem because, as I said, I gave the example of Moyale, when these people bring cattle to Nairobi, and they sell it, they get their money, and they go back. Traceability. But I have seen the gentleman, the cabinet secretary in charge of digital economy and ICT, talk about the issues of digital hubs. Let me tell you what happens. Not long ago, I was in Malaysia at a place called Bukit Jalil. Bukit Jalil is where Technology Park Malaysia is. Technology Park, the Medical University of Malaysia, the Asia Pacific University of Technology, they are all there. And this is what happened. If we want technology to work for us, because we are essentially saying that we want to import, or rather we want to, to market Kenya as an investment destination for multinational enterprises. This is what Malaysia did. Malaysia ensured first that the ISO certified all the small and micro enterprises, so that when international or multinational enterprises come and you are saying that you want local content to go into the production, because you only get returns if you have local content, because otherwise they will be engaging in all manner of transfer pricing and illicit financial flows that will render you just a conveyor belt. But if you want multinational corporations to make sense to you in this country, you must insist on local content, that your local content will go into their production processes so that you get something out of it. But for them, because remember, they are competing globally. So for your local content to make sense to them, because it must be something that, if used as a raw material, will produce a competitive product, this sector must be ISO certified, so that you know that the part or the input you are putting into your production process will not undermine the quality or the standard of your production. That way, then we shall be talking about an economy that is capable of attracting multinational enterprises or global players. I want to stop at that point, and thank you very much, KCA, for all this opportunity.
Thank you. Kwame, over to you. Parting shot.
My parting shot is this. The Institute of Economic Affairs, what we believe is that we are Kenyans because we are citizens, as the Constitution provides to us. We are not split into specific classes, be they dynasties or the other word that I hesitate to mention because it's a rude word. What government can do to us on the basis of a bottom-up philosophy is to unleash Kenyans' potential and to give us our economic freedoms as guaranteed in the Constitution, but also to give us the economic freedom to trade, to try and chase as much of our dreams as we can, and to ask us through a very basic and simple system to pay our taxes in the most efficient way. That's it. Nobody should be in a position in which you have to ask for a favor or to think the government needs to look at you as closer to them than another person. The rest of the political rhetoric, let politicians have fun. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think from my desk, I just want to challenge Kwame, because I know the work you do out there. Today, if we were able to strengthen our shilling by 30%, then we will reduce the burden of repaying our debt by nearly a similar margin, because our debt, largely external debt, are dollar denominated. So advise the handlers of government, the treasury, so that they can think of how to strengthen the shilling to make that debt payment burden be lesser, because what is happening now is actually exacerbating the whole thing. But that is just not part of this. So I think before I hand it over to the team, once again, I want to introduce myself. My name is Margaret, CPA Margaret Uchieng Dinga. I have been your moderator. Over to you, Mujuka.
Wow. I think you can do much better than that. Huh? Can we give them a serious round of applause? The whole team. It has really been fantastic. Eh? So in the spirit of time or rest of time, I'm going to call Emily to at least thank us, our guests in a much better way. So Madam Emily, the floor is yours. Emily is saying, Prof, if you could kindly come and issue gifts to our guests, we will appreciate it.
So at KCA University, we are very generous, and we also are very appreciative of your time. And to thank you for that, we have a little token that we want to give to you so that you can remember us and you can remember this day as well. So thank you, Mr. Kitonga, for your presence. Professor Ongore. Thank you for your time, and welcome to KCA again. Finally, Kwame.
Thank you very much. Prof, you can take back your seat. So I think we are almost coming to the tail end of our public lecture. I will want to call Madam Milka to at least give a vote of thanks for everything that went successfully today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I recognize the presence of our DVC, ASA, Prof. Bagakas, our 3 discussants, and all the guests, our students, our staff. Ladies and gentlemen, with all protocols observed, good evening. My name is Milka Njuguna. I work with the School of Professional Programs. We are proud today because we are the hosts. And I'm also delighted to give this vote of thanks. I start by quoting the words by James Allen that no duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks. First, I would like to give thanks to our Almighty, for today is a great day for the School of Professional Programs. We also go by technical college to have the chance to host the very first discussion, our public lecture this year, and we feel it's a very big opportunity given by the university. Our appreciation also goes to the university top management, led by our able VC and CEO, Prof. IC Isaiah Wakindiki, our 2 very hardworking DVCs, Prof. Bagakas and Prof. Damiana, and the entire management here at KCA for providing us with the resources necessary for today's function that you can see it has turned to be a success. To the organizing committee, led by Dr. Christine Wanjara, the Dean Rio, and our director, Dr. Rotich from Incubation Center, and their team led by Emily, the SPP staff who have joined the committee, led by Madam Frida. You can see there's a lot of work they are put into this event. They have been working tirelessly, and we pay a big attention to that by saying a good thank you. To our panelists today, Kwame, Prof. Vincent, and Dr. Tony, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of today's discussion. I am one of the economists, and you join me to agree that they have really touched on a number of issues that relate to all of us here as we form our society. All that we can wish for, and I hope it is our dream, one day, Kenya will be a better economy where most people, those that we were saying they are there at the bottom, would have the resources to at least meet the physiological needs. To our moderator, Margaret, thank you so much, for you have taken your role assigned with a lot of courage and in a very controlled manner. To our peace setter, our able director, acting School of Professional Programs, Mr. Faustin, You made our mind to be alert with the introduction to the discussion, and we say a big thank you. To all our guests, though we have come from different sectors, our guests, and even as students here, staff, plus our discussant today, thank you for joining us this day, because all that we have been discussing relates to each one of us here. We are the society, remember. To all of our staff and the students, feel appreciated for joining us today. To our MC Mjuka, a big clap to Mojuka. Well done. To our corporate team and the media present today, we cannot forget about you. We say a big thank you for your support. Again, thank you all. May God bless you. May God bless KCA University.
Thank you, Madam Milka, in a big way for that vote of thanks. I'm sure it is appreciated by all the members. The last bit is prayers. Yeah, one of our panelists has asked me to make a correction. He doesn't want to take credit where it is not yet due. So he has humbly asked me to inform you that he is a PhD student. He is not yet already a doctor, but that is where he's headed. So I think we can thank, I think Kenya lacks a lot of accountability and honesty. So if you can see it in front of us, you can now be assured that we brought you a panelist that is honest and upfront. I will call on Madam Joroge to at least close the session for us with prayers, but I'm sure she might want to do it from where she is. So.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I believe all of us have been refreshed and received a lot of knowledge. And the prayer we have is that everything that we, in the fullness of time, it will have its place in our country, in our great country, Kenya. So let us thank God together. Our Father and our God, we thank you for the gift of life you have given each and every one of us. God, here as KCA community, we are thanking you because you are allowing us to touch things that will impact our society maybe in 5 years or 10 years to come. It is a prayer, Lord, that you help us as we continue incubating and digesting all the knowledge that you are bringing here. We realize that you have called each and every one of us to be a part of your creation and to be a partner with you in transforming the nation of Kenya to be the nation that you ever wanted it to be. Thank you, God, even for the management of KCA. It's a time, God, that you are directing their minds. Your word has taught us to continue committing them in prayer, praying for wisdom, praying for knowledge, pray even that they'll have understanding and they'll be able to guide us into the path that you have ordained for us. We thank you even for this opportunity that you have given us today. We thank you even for the panelists and all that you have deliberated here. It is within your great agenda for the nation of Kenya. And I do pray that in the fullness of time, you will allow KCA to feature in a space in the country to actualize or to participate in implementing the many good discussions we have had here. Lord, we thank you even for the health that we have, all of us, and we pray that you continue guiding us through the path of life, protecting us, Father, that we live our life to the full, to see the fulfillment of your word in our lives, in KCA as an institution, KCA University as an institution, and Kenya as a country. For it is in Jesus' name we do pray and believe. Amen.
So that marks the end of our public lecture today. Students, please remember what we agreed. Stay behind. There are some refreshments for you. They will be served for you where you are seated. Our guests, panelists, and staff, kindly, somebody I'm sure will show our guests the way out. Staff, you know where we do our servings, outside here. So please, students, do not